So welcome back to another episode, and this is an interesting one. It really is. Today marks 8 years for me not smoking cigarettes. This is a fact on the show that I bring up a lot. I always talk about the old gaming days when I used to smoke, and people are like, you used to smoke cigarettes? And the answer is yeah, I used to smoke a lot. And today I wanted to talk about my journey of being a non-smoker to all of a sudden being completely addicted to cigarette smoking to quitting cold turkey. Really. And I thought this might help a lot of people who are addicted to something out there. I've only ever been addicted to cigarettes, but it was fucking intense. It really was. And the journey of it all was very, very hard. And I'm very happy to be sitting here 8 years later, a non-smoker. It's wonderful. It's something I've always personally wanted for myself. So let's go back to the beginning, is that I was always a non-smoker. I was a young guy and going through life. I was a skateboarder, and all my friends, we used to like skateboarding all the time and, going out and doing physical activities all the time. But what happened is one summer we started hanging out with this group of girls, and I must have been about 15, 16 years old. And this group of girls all smoked. All of them did. It was bizarre. And my group of guy friends, none of us smoked. And I always remember skateboarding around these girls, and I'm going, God, why do you guys smoke? That's ridiculous. And they're like, oh, it's fun. And I'm like, I don't think so. And I tried to smoke. My parents smoked. And I never got into smoking. I tried it with these girls, and I never liked it. Never liked it. It was not for me. But what happened is one night, I was behind. We all snuck out one night, and we had a bunch of cigarettes. And for the very first time, it was behind the Safeway. I always remember it. And I smoked this cigarette, and I inhaled finally. I think I finally did it right. And I got super lightheaded, and I felt like, whoa, there's huge waves of relaxation, do you want to call it? And I remember laying down going, this is amazing. And that was the first time I ever enjoyed smoking. Isn't that horrible? It's like, I look back now and I'm really sad by it. The next thing that happened is I didn't smoke it. I did that one time, I never smoked again. And then one day I came home during the 90s, and I, for some reason, decided to listen to a song on the radio, and I was like, this is a great song. I want to go get a cigarette to listen to it. Why? I have no idea. They were accessible. My parents smoked. I ran upstairs and I stole a cigarette, went downstairs and I lit it and I smoked, and I was like, yeah. And the problem is I had a moment. I think it's the same for anybody who does any drugs or anything like that. There's a time when you have a moment that's between you and that drug, and you enjoy it. And you're like, this is for me. And at that point, it was for me. I enjoyed smoking. I was like, and then once in a while, here and there, with those girls we were hanging out with, I would have a cigarette. And then all of my guy friends I was hanging out with, they all started smoking. And then it was smoking on the weekends. Then it was smoking, reading video game magazines. Then it was smoking, playing video games. Smoking slowly started to get into my life. And the year by year, it became more and more and more. And here's something. I smoked for 18 years at that point. 18 years of smoking cigarettes and playing video games. That's why I talk about it a lot in my memories, because it was this is something I did every day. I smoked, and I really liked it. Or so I thought. And at my peak, I was smoking around 30 cigarettes a day. And I was addicted. I could not go an hour and a half or an hour without a cigarette. It was not going to happen. When I went out drinking with my friends, it was always 2 cigarettes per beer. That's what I was doing. And before I knew it, I was an addict. And I didn't even realize I was an addict. And then the next thing I didn't realize over the years of smoking, how much it took out of me physically. For anybody who watches the show, who's watched the show since the beginning, you'll go back, maybe if you're new to the show, you go back and see my old first episode. You're like, holy shit, what's the matter with him? His voice is so deep. He looks terrible. I was so thin and gaunt looking. I was almost gray in appearance, almost alien. Like, I looked like a complete drug addict, which I was. But people, I don't think, they think, oh, hard drugs. But people don't realize cigarettes is a drug. And I didn't realize that. I was like, oh, it's just cigarettes. It's not good for me, but it's... And I didn't realize when I was looking in the mirror every day what had happened to me. And I just became really self-conscious, and I didn't like how I looked. I was like, how the fuck did this happen? And I was just like, oh, this is who I am. I didn't ever blame it on smoking. It was like, oh, I'm older, I'm thin, and this is who I am. I can't gain weight no matter if I try. And I was probably, when I smoked, around 135 to 140 pounds. Yeah, that's not nuts. So, but what happened is I started to loathe smoking. I started hanging out with, a lot of friends who didn't smoke, like Rob and my friend Satan, who have been on the show. I was hanging out with them when we were much younger, and they didn't smoke. I was fucking pissed. I was so jealous that they didn't need to smoke cigarettes to have a good time, because I certainly did. I couldn't do anything without. I couldn't say a sentence without a cigarette. I was that bad. And before I knew it, I was hacking every morning. I just felt like utter shit. And I started to realize how much of a toll it was taking on my life. And then what happens is when you're an addict to something, you desperately want to quit. You don't want to do it anymore, but you're addicted to something. You can't not do it. I tried to go a day without smoking once, and I started crying. I mean, I was that much of an addict. I just had tears. I need a cigarette. I can't do this. I was that hardcore. And so the frustration of it all was so insane. I was trapped. I was trapped by this drug. And I can't say it enough. People are like, oh, cigarette smoking, it's just cigarettes. No, it's a major drug, and it majorly has an effect on your life. And I'm going to explain when I get onto the other side of things. And I'm going to get into where I started with the show and all of that. So I started the show, and I was still a smoker, and I don't remember if you remember in my very first Fantasy Star episode, right behind me, it was in this room right here, I had a couch here. And I was sitting there with my bandana on, and I had a cigarette off to the side of me, and I was doing the episode, and then I'd grab a cigarette, and then I'd do cuts. So, you know what I mean? It's so ridiculous. But I started the show, but I talk like this, and I mean, if I could have started the show now, how I am now, back then, I think the show would have been a raving success. But I started as a raving addict to smoking, and it didn't help my cause. I think a lot of people were watching the episodes going, this guy is... There's something wrong with him. The amount of things, do you have cancer? And it was like, I was very self-conscious of it because I knew, I'm like, it's smoking. It's smoking. And I wanted to quit. So what happened is, how does one go for smoking for 18 years, 30 cigarettes a day, to quitting? This is not a paid advertisement, by the way. This has nothing to do with that. This is my story. My aunt was a big smoker as well, and she had, this is crazy, she'd gone to a woman, and she got hypnotized, and she'd quit. And I was so impressed with hearing that. I was like, wow, because my aunt smoked a lot too. I was like, if my aunt can quit, maybe this might work for me? I'd never tried to quit smoking. I tried for that one day and cried. I was like, what can I do? So I kind of knew I had like a 4-day weekend coming up from work, and I was like, I'm going to do this. And I remember I phoned this lady up, and I said, hey, listen, I said, I'd really like to come down. She's like, yeah, please, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, what do you do? She's like, oh, just come on over, and I'll hypnotize you, and I'll just talk to you for a couple hours, and that'll be about it. And I was like, great. I said, I'm really looking forward to this. And so my entire weekend was focused on this moment. All week and I didn't tell anybody. The only person I told was my friend Andrew, and he phoned me on the Friday night, and I was going on the Saturday, and he's like, how you doing? I said, well, and I felt so bad. I also smoked around all my friends when they were non-smokers. They hated it, but they put up with it because they kind of liked my company, I guess, even back then. But I said to him, I said, tomorrow morning I'm going to get hypnotized for smoking. And he's like, really? He couldn't believe it because he knew me as this crazy smoking addict who would never stop for anybody in the world. I wouldn't quit smoking for anything. And he's like, well, good luck with it all. And I think he was really rooting for me. I felt that he really was. And he's like, I think in his mind, he's like, this is the first time John's ever talked about quitting smoking. And so this is gross. I got up the next morning, I got in my car, and I drove to this woman's house. And it was probably around 35, 40 minutes away. And I must have had around 10 cigarettes in the car. I was coughing. And, oh, God, thinking about it now makes me kind of want to puke a little bit. Smoking constantly. And I finally get to her house. I could see where her house is. I park the car, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to go have a cigarette, my final cigarette. And I knew, isn't it weird? I'm like, this will be my final cigarette. I wanted to quit. I did. But I just had no willpower. And I went over, and it was one of those moments. Isn't life sometimes poetic? There was this little pond, and there was like ducks in the pond. And the sun was out, and I almost get shivers thinking about it. It was such a beautiful day out, and I was looking at absolutely beautiful nature. You know, natural nature, without chemicals or enhancements. And I looked, and I was having my smoke, and I was like, what I'm doing is so crazy by smoking. I remember having that moment. And I just looked at the peace and the normality of this tranquil moment, while I was doing something absolutely humanly, artificially made, that was destroying my body. I had that kind of moment. And I was like, I put out my cigarette, didn't throw it in the duck. I just threw it down. I was done with it. I didn't light any trees on fire. And so I went in and I met this lady, and she was very wonderful, a very short lady and very calming person. She's like, she must have looked at me and thought, who is this drug addict motherfucker coming in here? And I sat down on this nice couch, and I just closed my eyes. And I'm not kidding. I had heard of people getting hypnotized, but I didn't ever think that it was true. I never thought it was true. But I wanted to believe. And I think maybe that's also the case, is that I wanted to believe because I wanted to quit smoking. I wanted to fucking quit this horrible habit. I would have done anything. And I sat down, and what was so interesting is she had put on this beautiful music, and she talked to me for a good hour and a half, 2 hours. And I remember, everything she said. She used to we're going down deeper, all that kind of stuff. And you're in this, you're in this field and all this stuff. And then she's like, open your eyes, and I open my eyes, and she sees a cigarette, and she breaks it, and she's like, and she said all this stuff about, I can't even explain everything that she said. I remember it all, though, very well. And it was like this dream-like sequence that I was in, and she took me back to the very first moment when I smoked behind that Safeway with those girls. And it was so, I remember I had this tear down my eye because I was so upset. That was the moment it all began. 18 years of my life being an addict smoker. It was very, very hard for me to take in. It was horrible because that's the moment I became a fucking drug addict, cigarette addict. And she took me back to that moment, and we revisited it and changed it and all of that. And then she said, every time you want to have a cigarette from now on, you'll drink water instead. You won't have a cigarette, and cigarette smoking will be gross for you, and you'll hate it. And don't worry when you go back to work. All the people you used to smoke with, don't worry about them. It won't affect you. You're strong. You can do this, blah, blah, blah. It was very motivational. It was interesting. But I remember, and this is when my life changed. She counted me back and kind of snapped her fingers, and I was back in the real world. And I'm not kidding you. It felt like a moment out of the Matrix where Neo wakes up for the first time. I felt like that. I'd opened my eyes into a different reality than the reality I'd been in. And she went and got me some herbal tea, and I drank this herbal tea. It was the greatest thing I'd ever drank. And I just was looking at the world in a completely different way. Nothing artificial, just a different way. And so I sat and talked to her very lightly for a little bit, and I said, okay, well, I gotta get going. And I said, oh, I said, here, and I took out my pack of cigarettes and all my lighters. And back in the day, I used to have about 4 or 5 lighters on me. No joke. Just in case. I was that much of a smoking addict. And I said, I won't need these anymore. And I gave her all my cigarettes. I gave her everything and said, here. It was wild. And she's like, okay, I'll get rid of them for you. I said, okay. And I said, oh my God. I said, I'm not looking forward to getting in the car. And she's like, why? I said, because it's going to stink like smoke. And she's like, oh, you'll be okay. Just wind down the window and get it cleaned and stuff. I said, yeah. And I got in the car and I started driving. And it wasn't that, it was about to get dark out in another hour and a half or so. But all of a sudden I'm driving down the highway and all of a sudden the car just felt darker. And you know what that was? It wasn't that it was getting darker. It was the withdrawals kicking in. The withdrawals were starting. It was this darkness was coming in on me. I felt it. And this was the weirdest thing. Usually I'm like, oh no, I need a cigarette. But I was like, I said, okay, they said withdrawals are going to come in. I'll deal with them. That was something different. I came home. Now, you'll love this. This is where some of the show starts. I had just built the shelves. And I just kind of made this into the games room, like fully. It was still a work in progress, and I was sitting there, and at this time it was like 8 or 9 o'clock. And I was like, okay, what am I going to do? And so I was like, well, yeah, I'm not having a cigarette, so I'm going to go get a beer. And I went and got a beer and had a beer. And I drank this beer. I sat right here like it's smoking. On the floor like this, I kind of sit back. I drank this beer and I was like, oh, that's good beer. And then I'm like, wow, I didn't have a cigarette with that. Usually I have 2 cigarettes per beer. I didn't even want one. I'm like, but man, do I want some water? And that was the thing, because she kind of put it into my mind that instead of smoking cigarettes, drink water. So I started drinking fucking tons and tons of water. I mean, so much water that still to this day, I cannot believe I drank that much water in the first 3 weeks. It was like every time I want a cigarette, which was I did want a cigarette, but I'd drink water and I wouldn't ever smoke. And so I went and got a few more beers, and I was just like, this is wild. I don't even want to smoke. And I'm like, well, I'm tired. I'm going to go to bed. And I went to bed without smoking. But when I woke up the next morning, I was like hopping. I had so much. I shouldn't say it wasn't just energy. Like, oh, I feel great. It wasn't. It was like withdrawing energy. I was hopping. I was like, fuck. Like, a drug addict going, I need my Jonesin, man. I need my fucking. I was fucking going crazy. But I wasn't gonna smoke, and it was really, really sad. Is that I remember phoning my mom, and I said, Mom, I said, you'll never guess. And she said, what? I said, I quit smoking. And she said, no, you didn't. I said, I did. I said, I've been quit since yesterday. I said, I'm not going to smoke ever again. And she started crying on the phone. Like that kind of stuff was happening. And I remember, I was like, oh, I can't be here. And so Rob and his wife had invited me. They're like, oh, well, we're going to go walk around by the water for the day and go have, dinner or lunch and stuff like that. Why don't you come with us? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And so I walked down to meet them, and it was really weird. My feet hurt, and I didn't know why my feet hurt. And it was the circulation passing through them. My circulation had been fucked for 18 years, and my feet were just pulsating. Isn't that weird? And I guess my sense of smell came back so strong that I almost wanted to pass out. It was so powerful, but yet I was hopping, man. And I remember we went to some pub and we had lunch, and I had a couple of beers with those guys, and I never wanted to smoke, and I didn't. But I couldn't. I felt terrible. I felt like I couldn't hold a conversation. My concentration level was so bad. It was the worst it had ever been. I was like, I can't concentrate. I need a cigarette, drink water, and all of that. And so what happened is about 5 or 6 days passed, and I didn't feel that good. I went back to work, and nobody could believe I quit smoking. And they're like, oh, you'll start smoking again. I'm like, no, I'm done. It's over. And it was like 5 or 6 days later. I remember I opened my eyes, and I'm looking at the ceiling, and I was like, I feel good. For the first, I had beat the withdrawals. I had beat the initial 5 or 6 day withdrawal, which was quite intense. And I could concentrate and feel good. And now I'd gone past the one of the battles, which was get the withdrawals, get that out of the way. And now is this the regular battle of not smoking every day. And now I had so much time. I had so much time to fill the void. And it sounds so idiotic, but I started collecting action figures and G.I. Joes and playing with them and having a couple of beers in a night and taking, like doing cool scene shots and stuff. I needed something to do. And I was living on my own, right? So this is what I was doing. I started to get back into Dungeons and Dragons after 18 years. I was like, I want to play D&D again. Like, why haven't I been playing D&D? It was like I just was picking up right from where I left off when I started smoking. It was extraordinary. It really, really was. It changed my life so much. My entire life changed. I started, I met different people. I usually only ever date smokers. And now I was dating non-smokers. I was meeting a different class of kinds of people. And the thing is one thing I didn't want to do with this video is this is not to preach to anybody who enjoys smoking. It's not that kind of video. This is a video for me. This is a video for me and my personal journey. Like, I remember when I smoked, I couldn't ever tell anybody to quit smoking, ever. And nor, anybody telling me to quit smoking. I wouldn't listen to them. Like, oh, get out of here. Yeah, I'm not quitting smoking. I'll do what I want. And I had every right to say that. And this is not a preaching video where I'm like, yeah, quit doing what you're doing. No, it's not that. If you enjoy smoking, smoke. You know what I mean? If you enjoy doing recreational drugs or whatever you do it. Just do what the hell you want to do with your life. It's your fucking life. But to do with my life, I was sick and tired of being like a slave to, smoking cigarettes. I don't know how it happened. And I was so horribly, I hated it. But I'd finally beaten it. And the funny thing is I think about like 7 months went by and I beat smoking. But I had my one last temptation. It was the big last temptation I call. I never had it again. Is that I went out to a nightclub for New Year's, and when I was out, we were like 7 beers in. It's like New Year's. We're having a great old time, and all of a sudden, I just remember saying to the girl I was going out with at the time, I'm like, I need a fucking cigarette. I need a cigarette. I want a cigarette. And I'm like, no, I don't. And I'm like, it was weird. It was like the demon had come back and we're having it out for the last time. And then this other girl said to me, she's like, go to the bar and grab some lemons or limes and just start chewing on them. Just chew on them and it'll pass. I went up to that bar. I must have chewed on like 7 or 8 of these goddamn limes. I still want a cigarette. And what was funny though, after about 10 minutes, turn around and have another beer, talking to some more people. It passed. And it never came back again. Have I ever been tempted to smoke? No. Have I ever thought, God, could I have a cigarette? Sure I could, but I would never do it. Can I say this? The amount of smoking dreams I have, it's always the same dream. I must have had this dream, no joke, about 100 times since I quit smoking. The dream is always I'm out somewhere and I'm on my 4th cigarette. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, I started smoking again. Oh God, I'm addicted. Oh God, I gotta quit again. Oh no, I have to go through all of that again. And then I wake up and I'm like, thank God it's just a dream. Thank God it's just a dream. And all that kinds of stuff. And it was very important that I quit smoking as well because my father, died of lung cancer. And his father died of lung cancer. My dad died at 54. His dad died at 53. And hey, I'm on the journey there. And I love life so much, and I love, I just love everything about life so intensely, everything. I'm a very passionate guy about life. I want to get as much out of it as I can. That's why I quit smoking. I was like, I want to enjoy life. I want to get the most out of it. I'm some sympathy coughs for smoking there. And let me just say, when I quit smoking, doing the show just went in a beautiful brand new direction. I finally, the fog of 18 years had lifted. I could clearly think again. I could articulate what I was thinking. I became very creative again. And that's what's brought me to this moment here today. I'm 8 years not smoking, and I'm very, very thankful for it. And I want to definitely thank Jackie McLean. That's the lady who helped me quit smoking. You know, like a lot of people are like, oh, getting hypnotized doesn't work. And I agree, it doesn't work. But you know what? I wanted it to work for me. And so it did. And that's how it works. And I've had the greatest life since I quit smoking. And, you know, I got back my self-respect. You know, I met an incredible girl. I got married to her. I've got a wonderful life with her. None of that would have happened if I was still a smoker. And I'm very upset at times when I think back to my 20s, how my life could have been if I wasn't in a big haze of smoking. And yeah, for any of you guys who are addicted to anything, I know how it is. You know what I mean? I've never been addicted to drugs or alcohol, but cigarettes was my thing. Cigarettes was the thing I was addicted to. And it was one hell of a journey. But I can sit here 8 years later and say I'm a non-smoker. And man, I'm ever proud to be. And if you are having trouble with something, with smoking or drugs, or if you do want to quit, you know, just believe in yourself. You know, that's all you can do. Really believe in yourself, and just tell yourself how much you hate it and how much you'd like to get onto the other side. And if you think about it enough, you can make it happen. It's hard because when you're addicted to something, you're like, I can't quit this no matter what I do. But if you put in the back of your mind, I do want to quit, I do want to quit it. If you say it enough to yourself, that will build into something that can help you. And that's, you know, that small voice that said, I don't want to quit smoking, you know, I want to quit smoking, I want to get the fuck off this. That voice, you know, if I laid enough of that guilt in there, it finally became big enough that it took over my consciousness to make me go forward and quit it. And it's been wonderful since. And yeah, I just wanted to share that story with you guys because you've seen, you know, a lot of you have seen me from the beginning when I looked really sick, when I didn't look good, to now. And as I say, a lot of you look back going, why the fuck do you look so bad? And I tell you this much, I leave those fucking videos up to remind myself of what cigarettes did to me back then. What I looked like, what I sounded like. It's for me. In the end of the day, all those videos of me looking fucking like shit is for me because it reminds me of where I came from, and it's very important for me to remember where I came from and where I got to. So, guys, I know not a video game story, but really a story about my life, and really it is a story about the show. The show would not be here the same way unless all the events in my life transpired the way they did, and thank God that they all got sorted out the way that they did. So, anyways, guys, until next time.